Welcome to the lab task Continuous Deployment of Visual Studio Team Services. As a prerequisite for completing this task, you will need to have successfully completed the continuous integration task, the one previous to this. You'll also require a VSTS account, which you would have set up previously in that continuous integration task, and you'll also need an active Azure subscription that we can deploy our application into. So the tasks we're going to cover in this continuous deployment task. This first task here is related to the successful completion of the continuous integration task, which you should have already done. If you haven't done it now, you should return to it and make sure that's successfully running. We'll then modify that continuous integration build, and we'll include a section to publish ARM templates as an artifact. We'll then create a service endpoint that we can deploy our application into Azure. And then we'll create a release definition. And within that release definition, then we'll have several subsections, several components within it. We'll firstly be deploying the infrastructure into Azure App Services. We'll then be publishing the Parts Unlimited application into that infrastructure. We'll then clone that dev environment that we've just published our application into, and we'll create a staging and production environments, which we'll also then publish the application into. And then finally, we'll verify that release definition deployment, and we'll trigger build and a release. And we'll verify that's working successfully. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go to our VSTS account. We need to open up the build definition, the continuous integration build definition that we created early and ran previously. So we go to builds and releases, builds, go into our build definition. And I have a number of, I've run this a number of times subsequently, but I'll go into one of the original builds that successfully ran here, number 54. It's an older build that was released, and we can have a look at the output from that. What we're interested here really is the artifacts. And we can see there's one artifact listed here. This is the drop. This is the application that we'll push to Azure later on when we have the infrastructure to deploy into. And what we want to do is, in this task, we want to create a second artifact specifically based around the templates. You want to publish the ARM templates as an artifact which you can then use to build out our infrastructure in Azure. So we need to edit our build definition and click edit. And we want to add an additional publish artifact task to our build definition specifically for the ARM templates. So we click add, go to utilities, select publish build artifact, and click add. You then want to configure that. You won't worry about the display name just yet. You want to specify a path to publish. And this is where we want to specify for a path to publish. So that's within your repo, within the environment templates folder. The artifact name, we're going to be grabbing the templates and generating the templates as artifacts, and we're going to call this ARM templates. This artifact type will be server, and with the artifact name, that automatically populates the display name here as well. So you want to save that. And then we want to queue the build and kick it off. We have an agent queue hosted Visual Studio 2017. I'll have to paste it to master branch. And we want to trigger that continuous integration build. We can go in and have a look at the summaries and have a look at the logs and make sure that runs successfully. And when that build is completed, it has successfully run, you can scroll back through the logs and you can see just the part related to ARM templates, where they've been dropped, effectively what that's doing is just taking the ARM template files and placing them in a location we can pick them up later on for to easily use for our deployment. If we click on the build that's just run, look at the summary, go to artifacts, you can see we now have the drop, which was there previously, and we now also have an ARM templates artifact. We can have a look in here and we can see the ARM template files and the parameter files, the full environment setup merged and the full environment setup merged, .param.json. They're the two files we're interested here for our infrastructure deployment. And you can see they've been generated as an artifact. That's going to allow us to pick them up when we do our release and build definition or release definition later on. So the next thing we need to do is create a service endpoint in VSTS that connects into Azure or your Azure subscription and allows you to deploy into Azure from VSTS. To do that, we're going to use a service principal. So within your Azure subscription, you need to create a service principal, assign an application ID and have a tenant ID associated with that, and a password, which we can then plug into our VSTS service point connections settings, and that'll allow us to connect seamlessly then into Azure for our deployment. So there's a number of ways to create a service principal in Azure. There's a number of different tool sets you can use. I think probably the easiest way to do it is by using the Azure CLI 2.0. It's a cross-platform tool from Microsoft. Allows you to install this in any environment that you're running on, and it's a pretty sturdy, quick and easy to use tool to allow you to communicate with Azure easily and configure and deploy directly from the command line. If you haven't already got the Azure client installed, I'd recommend go to this page here and docs.microsoft.com and follow the relevant steps for your environment to install the Azure CLI. So once the Azure CLI is installed, we need to launch our command line as administrator, and then we need to log into Azure. So we need to copy this, we need our code, and you then get the message saying you've successfully signed into your Azure subscription, and you can close that tab. So you have details within here now specifically related to that subscription you've signed into. So there's a single command here we can use, which we can drop under command line to help us generate our service principal. I'll give this a different name, password, and it successfully created the service principal with that command. What we want to do next is verify that setting, and we're going to need a couple of values to do that. So we need the app ID with this command here, and the detail we're interested in this output here is that it has contributor access. You can have read access or contributor access, and contributor access is going to allow us to write within that subscription. And just to double check everything is working fine, our access is working fine, we can also log in with the service principal using this command here. Again, we need our app ID, we need our password, and we need our tenant ID. And we've been successfully able to log in here with that service principal, so that connectivity should be up and running. It should be fine. So there's 3 elements that you're going to require from the output here, and you should note these down. One is our tenant ID. And we'll just drop these into a into a text file, so we have them when we go to configure our VSTS, our service endpoint in VSTS. We also need our app ID, which was in the initial output, but it's in a different format down here. That's it there. It's B8675560. We can see that's listed here in the different identity parameter. It's a user to username. We'll copy that. And then we're going to need the password. The terms will be slightly different in VSTS, and we'll see that now in a moment. So we can close down these for the moment. We then need to go configure a service endpoint. So we go to our settings, services. We have one here already. I'll go new, Azure Resource Manager. Click on use the full version of the endpoint dialog. And we need to put in a connection name. Azure SP1. The environment is going to apply into is going to be Azure Cloud. We need a subscription ID, your subscription name. We need the service principal client ID, which is your app ID. We need the password. And we need the tenant ID. Then we click on the verify connection button or link, and that says verified. So we're good to go. Click OK to close the dialog. The next task we want to perform here is creating the release definition. So you want to go build and releases, click on releases. So you want to click on new definition. And we're prompted to select a template. Again, there's a range of options here we can choose for our release definition templates. You can see there's ones related to Kubernetes, Service Fabric. There's a lot of different options in here. We want to choose an empty template and click apply. You have default values populated here. That's fine. We'll just close that. And the first thing we want to do under pipeline is populate our artifacts. So you want to click add artifacts. Source type is from our build, the project within HOL, and our source from our build definition. Take the latest version, and source alias is the default value here, and then click add and click save just to save your settings. and we'll continue to click save as we go through it, just to save our configuration settings as we go. And then to link our artifacts to our release definition, into the environments within that, click the continuous deployment trigger icon, the lightning icon. Move the slider over to enabled. We want to select the branch within here. Click master and then click save. And we can close this dialog, and you can see graphically how this is presented, and as we add more environments you can see graphically how they're related. We can see the artifact being directly related to this environment 1 task here. We now want to select environment 1, go to tasks, environment 1. We'll change the name to dev and save that. On the agent phase, you wish to add a task, then click deploy, and we're looking for Azure Resource Group Deployment. I'll highlight that and click add. We'll click on Azure Deployment task, and now we need to configure this task. So the first thing we need to do is select our Azure subscription, and these are the service endpoints that we configured, or the service endpoint we configured earlier. I have 2 of them listed here. We just select the one we recently configured, Azure SP1. We then want to choose an action for the task, and there's a range of options in here about what you can do to resource groups and virtual machines, etc. You want to create or update the resource group. You need to specify a resource group name, and we're going to specify a variable for that, which we can then control more programmatically. Location, you want to choose an Azure data center that's reasonably close, so we'll choose East US. For template location, you want to choose a linked artifact, which we're going to pull from our build. You want to specify the template to deploy. ARM templates, the repo ARM templates, and it's full environment setup merged.json. And then we want to specify the parameter values for that in the associated JSON, and that's in the same location, full environment setup merge.param.json. Next, you want to specify a series of parameters which you want to feed into the scripts as they run, or the template files as they run. I'd recommend you can copy and paste the parameter values and the variable names from that continuous deployment github.io page, but I'd recommend to drop them into a text editor of some form first, just to make sure that there is no code page character errors or anything copied across into the parameter specifications here in VSTS, as if there are errors in here, it will result in a non-deployment and a broken deployment. So I dropped them into the text editor first, copy them, and you can just drop them in then into the parameter values, and you can see the types of values, parameters that we're pumping in here: server name, hosting plan name, website name, storage account names, passwords, etc. So that this is parameter values which have been pushed into the script as it runs, and we'll shortly define some of these parameter values now before we kick off the script. If you open up the parameter JSON file, and have a look inside it, some of the parameter values here, we can see they're listed here within the parameter file. You could hard code them within the file itself and not specify them as overrides here. Either way is valid. Remember, if you do specify values in the parameters file, remember that in order to change those values, you'd have to edit the file, commit it, and then create a new build in order for the release to have access to the new values. So by specifying them as overrides here, we don't need to do a new commit to take account of any changes that we need to make in the infrastructure deployment. So click save. And next we want to specify some variables. So click on variables. And within process variables, click add, and now you have to create the variable names, the website name, click add, server name, hosting plan, storage account name, container name, admin password, admin test password, and resource group name. So we need to specify values for these variables now, and it's important that the website name is a unique value. This will be a public facing, so it needs to be for a unique fully qualified domain name. It needs to have a unique value. In general, the names that you specify here should be lowercase, between I think it's 3 and 63 characters. Shouldn't have an underscore or dash in the name, as there are dashes appended during the name of some of the deployment slots, and that's going to cause a conflict. So the names you specify here need to meet the criteria for that Azure will accept. So keep them short, keep them simple, and try and keep them unique, and without any extended or different characters involved in them, if that's possible. Likewise for the password, it needs to meet the complexity requirements, so it has to have some uppercase, lowercase numbers, alpha and numeric characters, as well as possibly some extended characters as well. I think it needs to meet 3 of those 4 criteria to be accepted as an allowable value. If you get deployment errors when you actually go to deploy your infrastructure, it can be related to invalid variable names not being accepted by Azure, and you may get an error saying unable to deploy to a specific region or resource not available, and that's can be because of invalid variable names. So try and keep them short, sweet, lowercase, and keep them unique if at all possible. So we'll use values here like pu web k0134 pu srv 0134 hp k134 password. Take the same, and likewise for the resource group. This is where all of your infrastructure deployment is going to go, so make sure it's something relevant and identifiable. And click save. So let's return to our environment, and by going to tasks, dev, and just make sure we have everything configured correctly. This is a dev environment. Our agent phase, we can leave the display name is fine. We have hosted for the agent queue, hosted Visual Studio 2017, and that needs to be selected in order for the release to be able to run successfully. It's fine. We have all our configuration values in for our Azure deployment. The control option is enabled. There's nothing within our advanced settings which you need to do, and that should be good to go. So we'll go ahead and test this now, and we'll click on release to create a new release. We have our artifacts. We'll take the latest successful build version, which is the one we last run. That'll have the 2 artifacts available, the drop and the ARM templates. It's really the ARM templates that we're going to be pulling here. We can take the deployment trigger, environment for dev, leave them as they are, and click Q. We'll click on our release 1 up here to view the status of the release. then it's in progress, we can see. We then click on logs so we can view more closely what's going on. And when that's completed, it should run successfully. You can scroll down and go through the logs and see various sections within here where it's pulling the templates, it's pulling the artifacts down here, and then it's deploying into Azure. You should see a successful deployment. If you don't see a successful deployment, it's not unusual to see errors on your first run. It's really a case of go through them one by one. If you're seeing multiple errors, start at where it breaks down, go through the log files and try and track down where that's being called or where that's configured. Whether it's related to the artifacts, quite possibly could be missing the artifacts. It can't actually pull the artifacts. That's possible. As I was saying earlier, the variables can be a factor related to if a resource group or if a data center location doesn't appear to be available, or if it can't write to a particular resource group. That can typically be related to an invalid variable name, which is blocking the deployment. Azure can't take the name, so it can't actually write to that particular resource group. So check the variables, check that your artifacts are set up correctly. They're two good places to start if you are seeing errors. So we can check our deployment now. We can go into Azure, log into Azure, go to resource groups. We can see our resource group here, PUK134 resource group. You can see you have one successful deployment. You can see the various components in here that have been deployed with our infrastructure script. We can see the app servers here. We can see the dev environment. We can see the staging environment. We can see some application insights, resources, and there's SQL Server and SQL database resources as well as our app service plan. So we deploy this to our dev environment. So let's go look and see if that's and we have a URL. Yeah, there's nothing on this at the moment. If we click in here, so you can see that our app service has been created, but there is no application has been deployed yet to it, so there's nothing up here to look at. This is just the default page because the service is available. So infrastructure has now been created, and we can return to our release definition. So the next thing we want to do is return to our release definition. You want to click edit to edit that. Actually, one thing we forgot to do here is actually give it a better name. We'll call it, click on that blue pencil beside it at the top. You'll rename it Parts Unlimited, just to give it a bit better context so you can recognize what it is. So you want to return to our dev environment, go to tasks dev, and you want to add another task. And this task is going to deploy our application into our infrastructure, which we've already deployed. So you want to click on deploy. I'm looking for Azure App Service Deploy, which is the first on the list. Click add, and we click on this then to allow us to go ahead and configure it. So we can leave the version, the display name is fine for now. You need to select our Azure subscription. It's Azure SP1. You want the app service name. We're going to use the website name variable which we specified earlier on. We're going to check deploy to slot to specify that this is a deployment to slot. this will deploy it to the dev deployment slot, and this allows us to deploy to the site to an Azure deployment slot without affecting the production site. For resource group, again we'll use the variable. For slot name, you want to call it the dev virtual application. We can take our default value, just leave that alone. For package or folder, we'll click on the ellipsis, and what we're looking for here is our application files, which are included in the drop folder, and they're bundled as a zip. So we locate the parts unlimited.zip, we point to those. There's nothing in here we need to worry about. Within the additional deployment options, we do want to check the take app offline option. Really what this does is when the site is up and running, there can be various services accessing resources within the site. If you go to deploy it and override it, the files may be locked and it'll block you from doing so. So by specifying to take it offline before we push this out, that should remove the situation whereby we're not able to deploy because files are locked. I have seen instances where when you're pushing it, it is still locked, and it's difficult to track down why that is. You could also specify some additional parameters by using web deploy, and specify a retry interval or retry attempts, which will keep pushing the deployment until it gets available for a number of times. We won't do that in instance. The take app offline should be sufficient for us here, but that's just another additional option to try and force that update if you need to do so and files were locked. In our control options, you just need to make sure that's enabled, and then just click save. So let's go ahead and create a release now, and we can test that configuration and see if it deploys successfully. So click on release, create release, accept all the defaults, and click queue. We can then click on the release link here. You can see it was triggered just now. Click on logs, and we can see the output in real time. So I got a failed deployment here. So let's have a look and see where it is after breaking down. You have an error here in the output. Set parameter file not found, and it's referring to the retry interval and the retry attempts. These are parameter values which I placed in the release definition. So let's go and have a look and see what happened here. So you want to go back to our release definition, parts unlimited, click edit, go to tasks, dev. We know the first part was working fine, so let's go back to where we dropped in those two parameter values. And we can actually see here that we left in these two values. We unchecked the box, but we actually left these two values in when we didn't intend it, and we didn't uncheck this. So we need to uncheck this, remove the two values from a parameters file, uncheck this, click save, and then run our build again, and hopefully that's addressed that issue. And in relation to the artifacts, we're just taking the latest valid versions. There's a number, you can pick different versions or older versions of the artifacts if you wish from your repo. We're just taking the latest versions that we ran from our build definition earlier on. Take the defaults in the trigger, and we're just going to specify push it into the dev environment. Click queue. let's go back and have a look again at this release, and hopefully it's run successfully this time. Let's look at the output by clicking on the logs. And we can see the output in real time here. And we can see that that's run successfully this time. You can have again, you have a quick scroll down through the logs if you want, and have a just look at where various tasks took place and what was done. So that's a release. Should be successfully deployed. Now we can verify that was deployed successfully by returning to Azure. We're in our website with the -dev at the end. If we refresh this now, we should see our Parts Unlimited application deployed to this site and available within this site. And there we go. You can see this is a functioning site, and this is live on this URL here. Now, there's 2 other sites within here. If we modify the URL to staging, and likewise, if we remove the -dev or staging part of the address, we have our staging site and we have our production site, and neither of these have anything deployed to them. We only deployed to the dev site in that release. So next we want to return to our Parts Unlimited release definition, click Edit, and we want to add in environments for our staging and our production sites. So if we hover the mouse over here, we want to clone this existing site, this existing environment, to a new environment. Click the link here, and we want to call this under copy of dev. We want to change the name to staging, and click save. So we'll see under tasks we have 2 environments now. We have dev and staging. We have set the name. We have our agent cube, the same as before, so all the settings in here are identical to your dev configuration. We do need to remove the first task here. The first task deploys the infrastructure, so once that's done we don't need to deploy it again, and we can remove that infrastructure deployment task. Click remove, and that leaves us with just one task, which is going to push the application to the infrastructure. So within our configuration of the staging environment, you also want to make sure we deploy the slot, except the slot name this time is going to be staging. It's going to be the same application we deploy into the same subscription, the same app service name. All the other values remain the same. And click save. Now if you go to pipeline, we need to specify our pre-deployment conditions and post-deployment conditions. We've already configured our continuous deployment trigger in our artifacts. We haven't specified deployment conditions for dev yet, but we'll do so now for staging. So we click on the lightning icon and the person icon. That brings us to our pre-deployment conditions dialog over here. So dependency, what's going to trigger, the triggers for deploying the staging environment is going to be after this environment is successfully deployed. So the trigger is going to be after environment deployment, and the environment we're going to specify to deploy here is dev. We then want to specify some pre-deployment approvers, put on a specific user. Put myself as an approver and click save. We can close this dialog now. We then go to post deployment conditions. You can have an automatic approval type. We'll put in a specific user as well. And that will mean that a successful creation of the artifacts will trigger a dev deployment. We haven't specified approval requirements for dev yet, but we will require a pre-deployment approval to staging and also a post-deployment approval to staging. The pre-approval deployment being to make sure that yep, we're okay to go ahead and deploy it into staging, and the post-deployment being to verify that everything was actually run successfully. And we can close that. One thing to be aware of is in the old editor, which you can still access by this link over here, you could specify an option to send an email to a specific individual. The way email and notification in general is handled is slightly differently in the new editor. If you go to settings and then to notifications, rather than specifying pre and post deployment approvals via email in that dialog, it's handled at the user and group level, so people can opt in and opt out of specific approval types, and there's a range of different notification types and options which are available at a group and an individual level, and people can opt in and opt out of them. So within the notifications, if we click new subscription, we can see what different categories here around build completion, build failure. You can specify to be notified for specific instances or specific occurrences, for code check-in, and for release. If there's an approval for deployment is pending, you click next, click finish. This is I've now opted in to be notified for approval for deployment is pending, and I should receive an email now for that, and I can edit, disable, and go back and opt into other notification subscription items as well. So it's handled differently than it has been in previous versions. So if we return to our release definition, parts unlimited, we click edit. So now you want to clone our staging environment. We'll hover the mouse over the clone icon at the bottom, click clone. You can see that's a new environment being the clone of the staging one. We'll click to go in and configure it. We can see the name is copy of staging. We'll change that to production. We'll click save. Check our agent options, which is hosted Visual Studio 2017, which is all good. All the configuration settings remain the same again, except for, in this instance, we don't want to deploy to a slot. This is a production deployment, so you want to uncheck that box, and you can see that the slot options are now removed and they're not available. So we click save. And we can go and look at our tasks now in the pipeline, our pipeline view. We have configured pre and post deployment conditions for our staging environment, and we'll do the same now for our production environment. So you want the production environment to kick off after a successful staging deployment. So you have options here for dev and staging. We want to keep staging. We don't configure any filter or any scheduling around that, but that option is there if we want to do it. You want to specify approvers. That's because that's been a clone of our staging environment. This value is already set. We can close that. We can go to our post deployment conditions, and we can see approvers are set as well because that was also taken from our staging environment. and that should be our environment configured. So again, we have our continuous deployment trigger enabled when our artifacts are generated from the continuous integration build. We haven't specified any additional pre-deployment conditions. It's the trigger set up to be after release. After this, the artifact is created during the continuous integration build, and the continuous deployment trigger is set. We haven't set any post-deployment conditions, or this will be automatic. Likewise for the pre-deployment condition, the approvers is set to automatic. For our staging environment, we've specified the trigger to be after successful deployment to dev. We have an approver here. We have a post-deployment approver listed as well, specific user. And likewise for our pre-deployment conditions, after successful deployment to staging, the production environment will kick off. We have a pre-deployment approver specified and a post-deployment approver specified as well. So we need to test our deployment now, and to do that we can go all the way back to the start of our pipeline. Go to files, and we can trigger continuous integration build. We can go to source, website, controllers, and we can edit this file directly. And commit that. And if we go to builds, that will create a continuous integration build. We can see that's in progress. We can click on the build number to view the logs, and we can see that in real time. And that'll take a couple of minutes to run. We can see that build ran successfully. And if we go to releases, we can see the generation of those artifacts, and that continuous integration build has kicked off a new release. And that's currently in progress. And if we go to logs, we can view that release in real time, and currently that's deploying to dev. We had no pre or post deployment conditions set for our dev deployment, so it went ahead and deployed that drop into our dev infrastructure. We do have pre-deployment conditions set for our staging, and you can see that there's an approval required for a staging environment, a pre-deployment approval. If we click on approve or reject, you get to pre-approval pending dialog, and we can click approve, and that'll allow that staging deployment to go ahead. And that deployment to staging is finished, but you can see now again that there's a post-deployment approval pending, and that's prompted here. And also we can access that by clicking this icon here beside it. Click approve, and again you have a approval required for deployment into production. Click here and approve. And as that deploys to production, you can see that an email has been sent as well, and notifying about the pre-deployment approval. There's one for there's email notifications for pre and post deployment for staging and for production, and we can go in and click the link here, view approval, or actually approve directly from it in here. I mean, it'll give us the all the deployments that have been done in the release. We can go in and view it directly from the email. And it's giving us the status of that release when we click into the email, because that approval has already been done. And we also have a post deployment approval, and again this is for our production environment. You can have a look at it. Click the link again for post deployment approval, and this was configured by us in part of our post deployment approval settings, and we can see that in here. It'll bring us in and we can click the link, approve or reject. And this has been we've been brought in here directly from the email, and click approve. And this now goes to succeeded. And we can have a look at the logs at a high level. We can see all the tasks have been done. Everything is green, everything ran okay, and everything deployed successfully. We can double check that by returning to Azure. This is our dev site. We can refresh that, and that's up and running. And our staging site has now deployed, and that's available. Let's have a look at our production site, and that's also resolved. So we now have a deployment, identical artifact deployment into our dev, staging and production, and we've successfully completed our continuous deployment release with Visual Studio Team Services.